Of course, Timbigile, that is certainly right, and we've officially heard word from the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. Of course, they're declaring, or rather proclaiming the date for the elections. As it stands, it still will take place on the 27th of October. Of course, this in relation to what is happening now with the IEC, also then adopting those resolutions from that inquiry from Justice Moseneke, saying that there will be petitioning a competent court to look into whether those elections can be postponed. But to get a sense of this and where the IEC stands at the moment, Timbigile, we are now joined by Terry Tselane. He is, of course, a former commissioner at the IEC, who's just going to give us a bit more background and, insight into this decision. Now, Terry, thank you so much for joining us here on Newzroom Afrika. We've heard word from COCTA Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma there, saying, of course, proclaiming that date for the elections that will take place on the 27th of October for now. Terry, looking at that proclamation in which we have seen today, would you say that this was the right decision for the minister to take?
Absolutely, it was the correct decision because it was not going to be possible to postpone something that has not as yet been determined. So before you can ask for the postponement of the elections, it means the elections should have been determined. Now, the only way that the minister can determine the date of the elections, and she's the only person, by the way, empowered by Section 24 of the Municipal Electoral Act, rather Municipal Structures Act, to determine the date of the elections. So it is only after that particular process of determination, and that determination is through the proclamation that the minister has just now enacted. So it was not going to be possible to postpone an election that has not been determined. So the minister has determined the date of the elections, and it's for the IEC now to approach the minister using that report of the of Justice Moseneke and say that they are not able to meet their obligations in terms of Section 190 as a result of the pandemic. And this they do in terms of Section 8, subsection 1 of the Municipal Electoral Act. So that empowers the Commission to approach the person who has determined the date of an election to postpone those elections if conditions for free and fair elections do not exist. That's the first step that the IEC should actually be doing right now.
And Terry, now that the elections have been proclaimed by the minister, we also understand that that means that the voters' roll is now closed. When it comes to the IEC, what does this mean, firstly, for the IEC? And also, if we find ourselves in a position where the Constitutional Court will then say that, well, we cannot have these elections postponed, what does this mean for the IEC and the challenges it can present?
It's not going to be easy for the Electoral Commission, and therefore, if I were them, I would actually approach this in two ways. Because what has happened here is that the minister has met her constitutional obligation. I've indicated that in terms of the constitution, or rather the legislation, the minister is the only one who can determine the date of the elections. She has determined the date of the elections, and therefore, she has met also her constitutional duty, which is to make sure that the elections take place within the constitutionally stipulated period, which is what the Section 159 of the Constitution says. Now, when it goes to the Constitutional Court, the IEC is going to be confronted with two difficulties, and they'll have to go through these hurdles. The first one, the Constitutional Court will be saying to the IEC, our role is to interpret the legislation and not to make laws. If you want the laws to change, you're supposed to go to Parliament, because Parliament is the only institution that can actually make laws. And currently, there is Section 159 of the Constitution that says that the municipal term, it's a period of 5 years. So they would have to convince the court that they have actually gone through all the legal processes. Now, of course, what it means is that the IEC basically is going to be in violation of the Constitution in the sense that they are not able to meet their obligations in terms of Section 190 of the Constitution. In other words, because the Constitutional Court is not the one that makes laws, it only interprets the laws. And the IEC has got an obligation in terms of the Constitution, Section 190, to organize, manage, and administer the elections. Now that the minister has determined the date, it means the IEC must meet its constitutional obligation in terms of Section 190. But as we know, and then correctly so, the IEC instituted an inquiry led by Justice Tselane, and then that inquiry has empowered the IEC basically to approach the competent court and say to the competent court that they are not able to deliver free and fair elections because the conditions do not exist for free and fair elections. Now, the Constitutional Court will most probably have to determine one thing first, and that the IEC basically is in violation. It's a technical issue, but the IEC would have to be declared to be in violation of Section 190 in terms of being unable to meet its constitutional obligation, which is that of having to manage, organize, and deliver the elections. And then from there, then that's how the postponement can actually happen through the process of the Constitutional Court. But it's not just going to be a free sailing for the Electoral Commission. They're going to have to go through that. And then one question that are going to be asked as well is whether they've actually approached the lawmakers, which is Parliament, about having to change Section 159 because they are the only ones who are empowered to change Section 159 or part of the Constitution in order to enable the elections to take place with outside the constitutionally stipulated period of 90 days after the date of the last elections. And they will have to think very thoroughly this issue so that they can actually be able to give the Constitutional Court a convincing answer, because they can't just go to the Constitutional Court and say, we didn't approach Parliament because we felt it was inconvenient and then we didn't have enough time. Because I'm not too sure to what extent that would actually be acceptable to the Constitutional Court. So they are going to have to think thoroughly about reasons that they will provide the Constitutional Court with in order to ask for the postponement of the elections. But in order for that to happen, since the Constitutional Court, as the custodian of the Constitution, would have to only interpret the legislation, and the legislation is clear in terms of Section 159 that the elections have got to happen within five years, and the term of office of the municipal council is 5 years. And then therefore, if the Electoral Commission, now that the minister has determined the date, and that date falls within the 90 days stipulated by the Constitution, the ball is actually in the IEC's court. And that's how they've got to deal with that particular aspect. But as I've suggested, the starting point for them is basically to go to the minister, because the minister is the only one who is empowered to determine the date of the elections. And the legislation empowers the commission to approach the minister and say to the minister, please postpone the elections that you have determined because we are not able to meet our constitutional obligations of ensuring free and fair elections.
Mr. Tselane, when we saw that report from Justice Tselane basically saying that going to Parliament, there's really not much time right now, as you know that we are, of course, 3 months away from those elections, is it still possible to approach Parliament to ask for it to look into this matter and see that these elections can be postponed via the Parliament route?
The difficulty that the IEC will encounter there is that the Portfolio Committee actually asked the IEC recently why the IEC has not actually approached Parliament for the postponement, so that the legislation is accordingly amended in order to enable the process of postponement of the elections. And they were very incoherent in terms of their explanation to the Portfolio Committee. Now, when Justice Moseneke was raising this issue, he was not saying to the Commission that you should not actually explore all other avenues that are available. And he has actually given them those two processes to say there's an option of having to approach the Constitutional Court. Now, the inquiry led by Justice Moseneke was able to make consultations with various institutions within a very short space of time. So there is nothing that stops the IEC, even at this stage, to approach Parliament and try to do this, so that they're empowered and that when they approach the Constitutional Court, they are not going to be seen not to have attempted to deal with this issue in a very comprehensive way. So they can't just ignore Parliament as the lawmaker and then just run to the Constitutional Court. They've got to be seen to have done something and having made an attempt to go to the Constitution, rather to the lawmakers and saying, please try to do this, so that they don't second guess whether Parliament has got the capacity to deal with this within the current period, because they don't even know how long it will take the Constitutional Court to consider this particular issue.
And Mr. Tselane, should the Constitutional Court, of course, decline to postpone these elections? We've seen from the submissions made by other political parties, we know that, they are really divided on this matter. We know that the ANC wants these elections to go ahead, so does the DA and other parties. But at the same time, there are those political parties who say that these elections need to be postponed. What recourse does, the various political parties have in terms of wanting these elections to be postponed?
The IEC is going to be in a very difficult position. As I've suggested, that one of the things that they should actually be doing is not to second guess Parliament and then try to think what Parliament is likely to do or how long it will take Parliament to amend Section 159 in order to enable the elections to take place. So if or either way, the IEC will have to be found to be in violation of the Constitution. So if the elections are not taking place within the constitutional stipulated period, after the minister has proclaimed and having met her own constitutional obligation, the ball now is in the court of the IEC to deliver the elections in terms of Section 190 of the Constitution within the constitutional stipulated period, or according to the date that has been set by the minister. So if they're not able to do so, it means they've got to go to court. Now, going to court, as I've suggested, the court only interprets legislation and the application thereof. So at the moment, as we all know, it means the IEC is unable to meet that constitutional obligation of having to deliver, manage, and organize the elections. Let alone the reasons, because we all know the reasons, and some of us have supported the postponement. But the starting point is to accept that the IEC is in violation of its own constitutional obligation in terms of Section 190 of having to manage, organize, and deliver the elections.
All right. Thank you very much. Of course, that is Terry Tselane. He is, of course, the former commissioner at the IEC, just saying now that the ball is in the IEC's court to deliver free and fair elections. But Tembegile, we know that we've heard from the IEC, and they've released a statement this afternoon. They are expected to hold a press briefing tomorrow morning, and they will explain, in terms of how they will maneuver and challenge around this issue when it comes to holding those elections. We also heard from Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma saying that, well, proclaiming these elections also helps the IEC in its bid when it goes to the Constitutional Court. But will these elections go ahead, Tembegile? You know, we still don't know. But, you know, this is something that we'll continue to monitor throughout the course of the week.